Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to WeatherBrains episode number 728, the pre-show, the last show of the year for 2019. It's the annual year-ender, and we're going to have a great time tonight. You know who's going to be on the show tonight every year? Greg Carbon of NOAA's WPC, the Weather Prediction Center, will come on with his top 10 meteorological memories of the year. And we always have a ton of fun with Greg. So let's get to work here and do some little housekeeping chores, and then we'll get the guests on here, our regulars and the guests. Happy New Year's Eve to you, no matter where you're watching. And thanks for being patient with us. I was on vacation last week, so we did last week's show the week before. But we are back on schedule now. So what we're going to do here is slap an embed code on a web page that our TV station uses here. We simulcast this on television every Monday night. So that has been done. Now we can invite the guests. Okay, hope you had a Merry Christmas. Had a really good one last week. Good time with family. Had a little getaway time. We spent some time in the Big Apple, New York City at Christmas time. That was fun. I have not, as many times as I've been to New York City, I've never been there for Christmas before. You'd think at my ripe old age, I would have done that at some point, but I have not. So it was nice to see all the sights and see all the shows and do all the things. So let's see if we can get our guests on here. So we are now going to invite via email. Not so sure who's in or who's out tonight, but by golly, we're going to find out in just a minute. See who answers our little one ringy dingy, two ringy dingy deal here. All right, I think that's everybody. So they have been invited. Yeah, had an interesting time on the way back last night. We had a very minor severe weather deal here. But anyway, having to manage a severe weather event on social media and the digital side while traveling is always a ton of fun, especially when using good old airplane Wi-Fi. And I won't gripe. To me, it's still a miracle of modern technology, but it's like sucking a golf ball through a garden hose, trying to post graphics and do some updates over there. And we actually had one tornado warning in my state here, which means whenever that happens, we go on wall to wall on television. Obviously, I was not here. We had Brian Peters, that Professor Peters of this show, and Taylor Serrallo, one of our staff members here, doing that for 10 minutes. Probably one of the more bizarre tornado warning polygons of my career. So, Bill, did you see the tornado warning polygon for Marion County last night? And I don't think Bill can hear a word I'm saying.
I can now. I had to get you
okay.
Set up properly. So what was the question, James?
We're talking about we had one tornado warning.
That little tiny piece of the pie. I thought that was probably the end of a cancellation or something, because we were actually out and I didn't see it. So I thought that must be like the end of a polygon or something. That was pretty.
It was just strange.
So you weren't back, were you? Were you on television last night, or was Brian?
No, Brian Peters handled that, and Taylor Serrallo handled that on television. I was on the way back.
Good. Did y'all have fun in New York?
Yeah. Let me see if I can do one of these fancy screen shares. I need to learn how to do this. So let's see. Share.
I think I invited Greg. Let's see.
Image.
Oops, says it didn't go out yet. Oh, there we go. Yeah, impressive, James. Always takes over my screen when we screen share.
Yeah, whenever that happens, it like kind of blows everything up. Yeah, that's the tornado warning polygon. 169 people were in that, and there were no, incorporated communities. And the problem is that many of these older legacy warning systems are not storm based; they're county based, and so outdoor warning sirens and NOAA weather radios sounded in the bigger towns in that county, and everybody started to dig a hole because their weather radio tripped and they heard some siren and they just assumed they were under a tornado warning. And I think we have to do just a better job of explaining this. I think the storm-based warnings went operational in 2007. That's a long time ago. But yet people still think that entire counties are placed under tornado warnings. And this thing was issued at 5:28, canceled at 5:38, 10 minutes. And there were just all, that was the most confusion I have seen with a tornado warning in a long time. We had other issues where WEA alerts were being received in counties that had no warning. And it was just kind of messy last night. So we got wake to do. In fact, we have another integrated warning team session coming up here to discuss things. The biggest issue on the plates, we talked about this last show, was the mobile home issue. It's that is it's just a big issue, and we got some work to do, and we're going to try and start seeing if we can carve out a way where all of us in the weather enterprise can at the same time say, if you live in a mobile home in these places, you now need to go to your community shelter or your safe place. And this will not necessarily coincide with the issuance of a tornado warning.
Right.
And then this will not coincide with the issuance of a tornado watch. We're going to chart some whole new ground here and see if we can just agree to try and coordinate when we do this and how we do this and what triggers it. And obviously the products out of SPC, those MCDs, will have a lot to do with it. They did some of those Sunday night, very small little areas. And that's going to be a key product in this. But anyway, we're going to work on that this year. That's because, again, people are going to live in mobile homes. I'm not anti-mobile home. I'm, in fact, one of their biggest supporters. It is marvelous, wonderful, affordable housing. And but it's like a car. It's amazing. When I leave work, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to get in my car and go home.
That's very dangerous.
If I had to walk home, it would take probably, I don't know, 2-3 hours, but I can drive home in 20 minutes. That's a marvelous thing, but you can't be in a car during a tornado. It's a death trap. I'm not anti-car or anti-vehicle, and it's the same thing with mobile homes. I'm their biggest supporter, but you can't stay in them when the weather's dangerous, when there's a tornado nearby. And so we just have to.
I owe a lot of my healthy respect for the weather to my aunt living in a mobile home, because we would visit there a lot. And there's an image that's burned in my mind of my mom at one end of the mobile home and my aunt at the other, at the two doors. They had it facing to the southwest, and they would be there constantly when there were storms, because this was prior to there being reliable ways to receive warnings. And they would monitor those storms, and it would petrify me, because it was just like, when they're hanging out the side of the trailer, this is not going to be a good night. And there's your show title, but little early with the show title there. So I need Mr. Carbon. Let's see. I sent him the invite.
Hopefully he didn't forget us.
No, he had corresponded a couple of times since, early.
This should be the highlight of Greg's year right here, the annual year ender.
Absolutely.
It's the WeatherBrains year ender.
And it's actually going to have an even more important part tonight, because the 10th Meteorological Memory is going to be his review of the decade. So we may be here till like Thursday.
Yeah, we'll be here until the weekend.
Or he may have heard us talking and decided not to call.
Maybe he came around to his senses.
Yeah, smart man.
I'm not going to waste an hour with these goobers.
Y'all like my mic now? I've got, the hardest part of this whole process was stringing the shock mount. Are y'all all like pros at that?
No.
I mean, I would pay somebody to come and do this. Maybe there's a better kind somewhere, but I had the one elastic band shock mount, and there's no instructions and there's no YouTube video. And it's just like, here's a picture, try to get to this puzzle. So it worked. I can't believe it.
He's here, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh my goodness. I bet Greg Carbon knows how to string a shock mount.
Oh, Greg, can you hear us?
No. Check all your settings, Greg, over there down at the bottom with the.
Yeah, there's a little microphone and an arrow, and you can pick your audio source and then your video source by the camera. Your video looks fine.
Yeah,
but I don't think we're hearing you very well.
You might not be hearing us either.
He might not be hearing a word we're saying. Wow, my Mississippi State Bulldogs, what an embarrassment.
They just were terrible.
It's just a very strange situation. They, the coach, is he going to be fired or give him one more year? And they had this incident where the starting quarterback had his eye partially gouged out by another player on the team in an altercation.
Oh,
I mean, how does this happen?
No, you can't recover from that.
It's just like, so they played their backup quarterback who's not that good, and they looked uninspired and undisciplined, and it's a dumpster fire right now.
There goes 10-0 for the SEC in the bowl season.
But I guess my friends in Oklahoma can feel some pain too.
Just don't get in the way, LSU. I tell you what.
No.
That was brutal, just brutal.
I didn't realize. I'm sorry, James. Go ahead.
Hey, Greg, talk to us.
No,
Greg.
Oh, Greg, can you hear us? Raise your hand if you can hear us. Greg cannot hear us, and we can't. Yeah, this.
Let's see if I have his phone number. Hold on here. Let's go back to the old ways here. He said he was using Linux, so it might be a challenge. So yeah, that might be a problem.
Oh, he's got a Linux box. How geeky is that?
Isn't that's pretty geeky, isn't it? Let's see.
He just came to do some work, and he wonders why y'all are spying on him.
Yeah, he forgot to put that little sticker across his camera.
Right there, he waved his hand.
I can hear you now,
and we can hear him.
There we go.
Yes.
There we go.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Oh,
Proving once again, the smarter you are, the harder it is to join this program.
Exactly.
Well, we had no trouble getting on right now.
I don't have 9:30
Exactly.
yet. I was told 9:30.
Oh.
No, you got a thing that said 9:20, 9:25. Thank you.
I got 9:29.
And let us, in 3 seconds here, welcome TV and welcome to those watching on the television side. It's Monday night. You know what night this is. It is WeatherBrains night. So let's get this thing rolling on.
Hey, but before you start, I need to ask Greg about, or unless he wants to talk about it during the show. Did you find anything about that social media question that I asked you on email a couple of weeks ago?
You put me on the spot.
I sent you a note about how the WPC site was. There were two different occasions where it had asked me about. It was about social media, about one in the browser.
No, I'm sorry. I did not. I have not gotten to the bottom of that. We did look into it. I don't have a definitive answer for you.
I was just curious. I figured since you were here, I would ask.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Let's get this sucker going here. So let's start recorder 1 and recorder 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's WeatherBrains, the weekly show all about weather. This is episode number 728. The last show of 2019. Wow, but it's a good one. It's our annual year ender, which means we're going to look back at the big weather events of 2019. But before we do that, let's bring in our regulars here real quick before Greg comes on with us. Aubrey, it's always great to see you. Thank you for your service to the Weather Enterprise.
Aw, you're so sweet, James. Thank you for your service.
No, oh shucks.
Oh, they're blushing.
James makes changes. He
does. He makes stuff happen.
Yep, exactly.
So Aubrey, what's going on in Harrisonburg?
Well,
you're working this week, I see.
Oh, I'm working, but I just got back from a wedding this weekend in Kentucky with it was a double meteorologist wedding.
Oh.
Wow, a dipole.
Yeah.
Anybody we know?
You might, Mr. Greg Nordstrom from Mississippi State.
Oh, yeah. Come on, everybody knows Greg.
Greg was one of my teachers, and also got to see Justin Jackson, who was also one of my teachers. He was at the wedding.
Yep.
But Greg married his fiancee, Taylor, who's also a broadcast meteorologist. She's in Mississippi.
Oh, yeah. She works with Eric Janson, who was on this program a couple of months ago down in Biloxi.
Awesome. Yep. So got to meet some people I talked to on Twitter, which is always great. And just had a really good time. Beautiful weather other than driving in the rain the whole way home. But and then came home to temperatures today. Our high was 67.
Oh, wow.
Wow, nice.
Beautiful day.
So you set foot in a new state, I saw. Which state did you conquer?
I did. All right. So I conquered Indiana, made a little small detour to get the last Midwest state. And now I am planning my attack on the 11 I have left.
That's the lowest degree of difficulty on the whole thing, Aubrey.
Yeah, it was. So got a few trips planned.
The question is, you said you made a detour. How far a detour to set foot in Indiana?
Only 20 minutes. However, I was not feeling very good the day after the wedding. So that extra 20 minutes felt like 3 hours.
The party was that good, huh?
Yeah. The after party was that good. Well, the party and the after party was that good.
Dr. John, how many states have you visited in your illustrious career?
41, James.
Oh, wow.
41.
41. Got 9 to go.
That's a lot.
So does it count if you fly over them? I guess you have to actually physically.
Nope.
No.
See, I was on a train through Utah, but we were asleep, and so I'm not counting Utah.
It looks like a train would count.
You slept through Utah,
but I never even got to see it.
So you have to step out of the car and step on it. Is that what you have to do?
Step on it.
I would think so.
Okay. Is that how you've done yours, Dr. John? You've actually.
Yeah, I've actually been on the ground. Yeah.
All right, good.
Or have 10,000 social media followers in that.
Wow. So John, Aubrey, she was in the 60s today. How warm were you today?
Well, a very interesting question. The GFS kept trying to push us into the 60s today, and about 46 was the high. We never got out of that.
Never got the warm front.
Never got the warm air. And actually, we're waiting for the occluded front to come across, but it's been kind of a dismal day. Low visibility, low stratus deck. Much different than Saturday, where we actually got, I think 54 was the high on Saturday. It's beautiful.
Wow. So we got a couple of Texas representatives here, including Troy Kimmel down in Austin. So Troy, what's happening down in Austin, Tejas?
We were actually 5 degrees cooler for a high today than Aubrey was. We were 62 here in Austin, and a beautiful, not a cloud in the sky, beautiful all day long, and humidity dew points down close to 30. And so it's been a very, very dry day. As we'll wrap up the month, and really for the year, the latter part of the year being drier than average around here. We had a wildfire down in Bastrop County earlier this evening, but there wasn't much wind today. Otherwise, that would have gotten out of control. But bottom line, very, very nice day indeed.
Awesome. So, Kevin, what's your New Year's resolution? Get back on the tweeter, face bag? What's the deal?
That might be. Yeah, that's something to consider. We were 10 degrees. We were 10 degrees colder than Troy, though. We only did 52 today.
Okay.
Wow, you guys must have. hats and gloves and overalls and everything else.
Yes,
Right?
I know. I
No
barely
shovels. Yeah.
barely came out.
Wow.
The back on the state thing, did you guys know this? You know, I one of my goals is to go to the Four Corners right there in the southwestern part of the country, because we're always sitting there waiting on cutoff lows to come out past the Four Corners. Did you know that they charge you to stand on that spot now?
Really?
Yes.
Oh, brother.
It's run by some organization. I think it's some reservation, or it might be Native American thing now, and it might even be I think you might have to have. There's a lesser charge to get into the location, and maybe an additional charge to actually stand on the Four Corners. I need to go check that now, but there is a charge to do that, which I thought was kind of amazing.
It says
I'd rather go stand on the corner in Winslow, Arizona.
There you go.
There you go.
There you go.
What is it? $5?
$5
to stand on the Four Corners.
cash only.
Cash only. Wow. There's your show title.
Cash only.
You always knew that was a show title.
Yeah.
All right, Bill, let's bring in Greg. This is my favorite show of the year. Let's get right to it here.
We looking forward to this one all year. And I just counted. I only have 8 states to go, so I got to get on the ball here.
Get on it.
Yeah, I got 8 to go, and a couple of them are up there in your neck of the woods. Delaware. I've never stepped foot in Delaware.
Never been to Delaware?
No.
A home of dogfish? Oh my goodness.
No, that's not true. I went to Bethany Beach. That's in Delaware.
That is in Delaware.
Bethany Beach
scratching
is
that one
Maryland.
off, so I'm down to 7 now.
Bill, Bethany Beach is Maryland.
Oh,
It is not. It is. Is it really? Put it back
I
on.
believe
Welcome to states I've stood in, Brains.
Show title.
I'm currently back at 8, so we'll
just full of
resolve
it
that
today. Yeah.
question of geography. I bet our guest tonight knows what state Bethany Beach is in. He's the forecast operations branch chief at the WPC, if their website is up to date. Greg Carbon.
Hey, good evening, everyone.
Greg.
Hey, Greg.
Good to see you.
We always feel like we have the night off on when you come to play with us. I heard that you were going to cover 10 years tonight, so that could take a while.
Yeah, it's taken a while to get this together. I mean, it is interesting that one of the benefits of doing the annual review is that I can go back and look at some of these and, oh yeah, that happened. Because if someone asked me that, I might not know, I might not have it. So it's good to have the refresher there, and it's good for recall, because I don't think I would recall these events for putting the archive together.
All right, your Linux box do all that screen sharing and stuff, or
how's my audio?
It's good.
It's
very good.
Your video's great.
Okay, I got
Loud and clear.
got a great Linux setup here. ThinkPad laptop running exclusively Linux. Deleted a Microsoft right off of that thing, and
show title.
Yeah.
dual monitors. Got my one monitor here, and then the show on the larger monitor above. So
kind of like a Star Trek chair there too. Kind of
working like a charm.
There you go. All right.
So yeah, I've got 4 states to go.
Which 4 do you have?
North Dakota, Idaho, Alaska, and Hawaii.
Oh wow!
I
shared North Dakota and Idaho with you, so that's
Someone said if you go to North Dakota last, if you go to the visitor center in Fargo, they have a club which is the best of the 50 club, and you get like a T-shirt and a magnet for saving the best for last of North Dakota.
Is it cash only?
It is not, but they've marketed it because so many people were saving North Dakota for last, and so they were able to kind of market this little club, which is really cute. So save North Dakota for last.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Greg, this show is yours, so take it away.
Go.
Oh, wow. All right. We're moving right along here. Okay, so as is tradition, the National Weather Association has had me back for, I think it was the 17th year in 2019 to give a review of the Meteorological Memories talk of the year. This talk started as a chapter talk to the Omaha, Nebraska AMS chapter in the early 2000s. And it was Dr. Ken Dewey, actually, who asked me after a couple of years of that to do a review of the decade of the 2000s. And of course, I didn't start the talk until I was into the early 2000s, but and the last time I put together a decade of memories was for Ken Dewey. So So this goes out to Ken for the latest decade. But first, we'll go over the 10 of 2019. Actually, the 9 of 2019, and then the number 10 tonight will be my memories of the decade from the last 10 annual talks. So how's that sound for a plan? Expand.
Hey. Does James approve? James, you approve?
All good.
All righty. So we'll start out. I just a summary of now the way this works is these are my meteorological memories. They are not ranked in any fashion. They're sort of presented in chronological order, and your mileage may vary, right? Everybody has their specific memorable weather events of any year. These are ones that for one reason or another, I decided to focus on over the prior year. The NWA meetings seem to be getting earlier in the year, and so it's always hard to put a talk together for the annual National Weather Association meeting that encompasses the whole calendar year. So I usually leave a couple or one event, number 10, as a question mark, and save that for WeatherBrains. So
your comments are fascinating me now, Greg, because I'm anxious to see, because this is meteorological events, I suppose, but the NWA and I guess we call Sharpie Gate. Wouldn't that be interesting to see if that makes it into the list?
Ooh, yes.
So many questions. So you will. I don't know if there'll be a reference to that or not. I can't remember if I left that in the slide deck or not. So the 44th National Weather Association annual meeting was in beautiful Huntsville, Alabama, back in September of 2019, and I started out reviewing event selection number 10 from 2018. So number 10 for 2018, which was a question mark when I had presented it in late 2018, was Hurricane Michael. So I don't think anybody would doubt the impact and impressive nature of that meteorological event. October 7th through the 16th was the lifetime of Michael in 2018. And we all seen the devastating losses from Michael across parts of the Florida Panhandle in late 2018. So that was memory number 10 for 2018. Number 1 for 2019 was titled "Cold as F in Chicago." So Fahrenheit. Cold as Fahrenheit. Cold Fahrenheit temperatures in Chicago. So the Arctic invaded the upper Midwest in late January of 2019, setting all-time record lows at around 30 below in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Iowa. Dozens of locations also recorded all-time low maximum temperatures during this event, and a preliminary, may not be preliminary anymore, but at the time, new state record of 38 below Fahrenheit, minus 38 F at Mount Carroll, Illinois. So this is memory number 1 for 2019. I did a quick review of this event in the wake of the outbreak, the Arctic outbreak, and while impressive, it really was. It didn't have a lot of staying power. It was a quick shot at the period of time when you would expect very low cold temperatures to reach this part of the country, and then essentially it was done with. But still, nonetheless, an impressive weather memory from 2019.
Hey, Greg, point of order. Did you want to share your slides while you're talking, or?
Well, what I'm doing is I'm just reading a summary of each one of these, so it wouldn't be all that entertaining at this point.
Hey, so Greg, to follow up on what you just said, wasn't there, what I recall, not only was the magnitude of that cold, but the temperature rise over the next 48 hours was extraordinary. It was something like 50 or 60 degrees. It was something extraordinary.
Real bounce back.
Yeah.
And I'm sure many were not unhappy to see that.
The January thaw.
So, Yeah. On to number 2, titled a Very Wet February. This was where, we saw a pretty active jet stream, subtropical jet stream across the southern United States throughout the cool season into February, bringing abundant moisture to parts of the Tennessee Valley. Monthly precipitation in these areas of 300% of normal: Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee. Many rivers above flood stage by the end of the month of February. So this is a very active period of time. Of course, I work at WPC, where they specialize in the quantitative precipitation forecasts. And cool season forecasts are easier than warm season and easier than tropical weather. So the forecasts for this event were quite accurate and quite good. But nonetheless, this brought quite a bit of damage and flooding to parts of the Mid-South region. So that was memory number 2. Memory number 3 hits close to home there in Alabama. The EF4 tornado in Lee County, Alabama, with 23 fatalities, almost about 100 injuries, and a very long 70-mile long path of damage with this EF4 tornado. And another tornado following relatively close behind. While not unheard of, pretty unusual to see, a devastating tornado followed by another tornado less than an hour behind the first one. And certainly frightful to see that happen, and an incredible amount of damage in that part of Alabama. So that was memory number 4. Well, I'm sorry, memory number 3. Number 4 was the central United States bomb cyclone that really started to set the stage for pretty amazing flooding and damage that lasted for months across parts of eastern Nebraska and the Missouri Valley. But this particular event, record low pressure occurring from early March into mid-March, the low pressure records set in combination with a blizzard to the west and incredibly heavy rain falling on frozen ground and snow across parts of eastern Nebraska and parts of Iowa. Nebraska roads and communities were impacted for weeks. This was, again, just the start of the event, and there were historic crests on the Platte River. Previous records were beat by 5 feet in the flood stage in those areas. And we saw, the aerial photographs and the satellite photographs just showing the extensive width of the Missouri River when in flood, going beyond many of the levees that were designed to try to stop that. So memory number 4, the central United States bomb cyclone. And number 5 is just titled "Here We Go Again." So, less than a month later, another powerful Panhandle Hook cyclone buries parts of the northern and central plains, high plains especially, with an April blizzard. Some South Dakota towns measured over 2 feet of snow. Pierre with just over 16 inches of snow, the second highest 3-day total in their recorded history there. So this is a prolific snowstorm, but also brought additional precipitation to those areas already in flood. What's interesting about this event as well is that almost a year earlier, across very much the same region, a swath of very heavy record-breaking snowfall from parts of South Dakota, Nebraska, up across the upper Mississippi Valley. That's the 2018 event in April, mid-April, causing record snowfall in parts of Green Bay, and also more severe weather across the South, flooding down around Mobile. That was just a year earlier. So similar pattern, year apart. Number 6, back to more precipitation. It seems, it's probably should be understood that working at WPC, I'm probably a little more focused on some precipitation events, whereas some of these talks in the past where I was at Storm Prediction Center focused on tornado outbreaks. Flooding has been it feels almost nonstop for the 3.5 years now that I've been at WPC. So the record year precipitation, the wettest 365-day period on record, near wettest month on record across Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma in May of 2019. Parts of Kansas measured 60% over half of their annual precipitation in 1 month, in the month of May. Second May in a row set records for monthly rainfall at Chicago. So again, it's interesting. It kind of goes back to the pattern that we had seen the year before in April, continuing into May across this part of the country, with Chicago setting 2 monthly rainfall records in a row, 2018 in May and 2019 in May. And then CONUS, the continental contiguous United States, drought coverage drops to almost nothing. Almost unheard of to see so little area of the United States covered in drought from all of the heavy rainfall events that basically moistened up a lot of ground out there. And of course, it's starting to creep back now in parts of the country, especially the Intermountain West and parts of the West. But and the Southeast had a dry year as well. But a record year in precipitation comes in as memory number 6 for 2019. So number 7 was a new thing in 2019. It was a guest appearance at the National Weather Association by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Patrick Marsh. I enlisted his help for the tornado events of the past year. And so he put together a brief summary of some of the more significant tornado events of the year. Second most tornadoes in the month of May. There were 513 tornadoes in May of 2019. That's only second to the 542 in 2003, when I was still at SPC. I remember that May quite well. Third most tornadoes in any month. The 513 comes in third. The first place goes to April 2011, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Anybody want to venture a guess as to how many tornadoes were recorded in April of 2011?
500 and.
So this one,
I'm going to say 700.
May of 2019 had 513. That comes in third.
714.
Oh, that's good. It was 757.
Wow.
Ooh.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, I remember that month well too. I'm sure many of you do.
Don't we all?
Yeah, that was
Wow.
Just, it's hard to put that one in any kind of perspective. It just stands out. There were 19 EF3s and 2 EF4 tornadoes in May of 2019. Only 12 EF3 or greater tornadoes occurred in all of 2018. So the month of May 2019, certainly a dramatic comeback from the events of 2018. In all of that, only 7 fatalities, despite many of these events being nighttime tornado events in urban environments. So we might be doing something right here. That's a remarkable statistic to see that amount of activity with very few fatalities occurring. Especially when tornadoes occur at night over urban areas. So that was Patrick's contribution to the year in review, and I have to thank him for that and for presenting those statistics at the NWA. Number 8, baked Alaska. So this one, Alaska is not to be ignored. I once heard a colleague about a year or so, maybe 2 years ago now, say Alaska is the canary in the coal mine. And I was looking back over the decade today, and Alaska is just roasting. And there are many long-term records that have been there. Most of the 2010s have seen record-breaking heat in Alaska. So for 2019, Barrow hit 73 degrees on June 20th. That was a record high for the month of June, the earliest they've been that warm. And the unusual heat continued in July in Alaska. Anchorage hit 80 degrees for 6 days, 2 days more than their previous record. On July 4th, it was 90 in Anchorage for an all-time max, beating the previous by 5 degrees. And July 2019 beat July 2004 for the warmest month on record in Alaska. So again, the 2000s and the 2010s especially have been unusually warm and having a pretty dramatic impact, not just on Alaska and the and the permafrost regions, but also on the lack of sea ice there. So when the fall storms start coming in, there's no protection for some of those coastal sections that would normally be locked in ice by that time of year. I recently read an interesting article about how there's a company in Alaska that is actually selling refrigeration technology to maintain the foundations of the pipeline structures, because the pipeline structures really do require permafrost in order to be stable. Without the permafrost, it's very difficult to have any foundation for a large oil pipeline. And so I guess there's a company that is now specializing in, they bring them in, hey, it's getting too warm in the permafrost, I have to keep that colder so that those foundations can be maintained there. So certainly some infrastructure impacts given the warming that we're seeing in Alaska. Number 9, Hurricane Dorian, tied with the Labor Day hurricane in 1935 for strongest hurricane in the Atlantic Basin with 185-mile-an-hour winds. Of course, we saw the devastation in Abaco Island in the Bahamas, severely impacted, stalled over the northern Bahamas for over a day, and even caused severe surge-side flooding in North Carolina and damage even up into Nova Scotia. When I put the talk together, this summary slide was the latest that I had at the time for Hurricane Dorian. And I think that rounds out the 9 for 2019. I think in Huntsville, I think I had number 10 as so many questions. Or maybe you don't want to ask those questions. There's no Sharpie on here, but it was a remarkable year, and these talks are a challenge. I try to put quite a bit of analysis into the different events, but my day job doesn't often allow me to do that, and so I get down to the wire and I start getting very nervous about putting together the year in review talk, especially now with almost 2 decades of work on these things. So you got to get creative. You got to invite like Patrick Marsh to help out. And I always tell people, these are my memories, but certainly encourage folks, if they're interested, to send me their memories through the year. You never know, you might make it into the list. So,
Greg, I was wondering if the Huntsville meeting represented the warmest temperatures ever for an NWA meeting.
Oh, it was hot, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was mid to upper 90s.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. Yeah, we could check that out.
I think it might be, actually. I think those might have been record temperatures.
That was a toasty one. Yeah, it'd be really interesting to do that, is look at the weather that occurred at all the NWA.
Yeah.
There were a lot of superlatives.
So what I did, I told Bill earlier today, for number 10, instead of, coming up with a new, if I were to come up with a 10 for 2019, it probably would be Imelda. I found Imelda's rainfall, quite fascinating, the evolution of that tropical storm so quickly off the coast of Texas, and then basically moving inland right away. But these kind of 2 waves of incredibly impressive rainfall events over and just primarily east of the Houston metro area, 20 inches the first night and 30 inches the next night. And it was really kind of, at the time, you're trying to put that event in some sort of perspective, going, oh my goodness, we've had Harvey, we've had Florence, Dorian, luckily not quite as heavy a rainfall event across eastern North Carolina, but nonetheless, I think they had 15 inches locally in some spots. The recent past, you have Matthew and others. I've been looking into rainfall, extreme rainfall, or what I'm calling prolific rainfall days with respect to tropical systems. And there's some really interesting trends that appear to be occurring with these. There appear to be more numerous days of very high-end accumulation of 10 inches or greater. And Imelda was one of those events. Imelda, though, when all was said and done, was about 1/5 the extent of Harvey. So that helps put it in some perspective. When we look at the aerial coverage of the 10 inches or greater precipitation in any one day, Harvey was at least 5 times larger than Imelda's rainfall footprint. But that doesn't mean that there weren't struggles and costs involved, because Imelda hit, populated areas once again that were also hit by Harvey, and was quite a devastating event. So if I had to pick a 10 for 2019, Imelda should make the list. So I'll pause there before going on to the decade, if anybody's got comments, questions, concerns.
Hey, Greg, Troy Kimmel here. Good to talk. Hey, got a question for you, which you probably get, especially when we walk away from the NWA meetings and so forth. Do you have anywhere you put this on a website or anything?
So there are 2 NWA meetings over the last 10 years that I have not been able to make in person because of various issues, travel issues, that when I was looking back over the last few days of these past events, those 2 exist actually as a streaming video online. I think I tweeted back at Jeff Craven earlier this evening that I was frustrated by the fact that I haven't kept more careful records, but I did find all of my my summaries, at least for the last decade, in various formats, from PowerPoint to PDF. And so the short answer there, Troy, is sort of.
Well, you realize this is what we call the James Spann Enterprises, and we're willing to monetize anything here.
We're not very successful so far.
No, I'm sorry there, Bill.
So yeah, well, they exist, and now in the digital age, you can dig up the scraps and remake something. And again, I think what's most interesting about these talks is that there's always someone, and I think it's wonderful. They have their own memories, and some other event, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying that this is the definitive list. This is just the ones that stand out to me.
But I think at the same time, though, Greg, that it's Greg Carbon. You are the guy that. And I do think it serves a useful purpose. And are you going to be at the AMS meetings in Boston? Or are you going to be able to make it up?
I am hopefully lucky enough to be up there. Yes, I've got.
Well, bring these up on thumb drive, and I'll make a deal in the alley out behind the place or something like that. Okay, that'll be by the way, Greg, right at the time the blizzard begins up there when we get up.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Be at memory number 1 for 2020.
There you go. Oh, wow. I never thought about that.
Yeah, we'll talk. And I actually talked to Steve Harnett a few years ago about, packaging these at some point as an NWA published book or journal. We'll have to see. So I've got it documented. A lot of work to pull it off, but it's kind of a labor of love. So,
well, I tell you, there is a great deal of value in it, and we appreciate it. The work that you put into it, both when you were at SPC and other folks that do the same thing. Patrick and other folks really appreciate we all appreciate what y'all do.
Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate that.
So Greg, has a non-event ever been close to making the list?
Oh, yeah. Oh, there are a couple of non-events. Actually, there's one I did a couple of years ago. 2012, I did May, June, tornadoes go missing. And I had a picture of a milk carton with a tornado on it.
Yeah, I remember that. Definitely.
That's the other thing is, these are serious events. There's no question about it. And some of them very devastating, but it's also interesting to look at them in a number of different ways. And I kind of, some of them are more lighthearted than others. And as you might know, I'm a fan of alliteration, right? So I'll use that once in a while. I think I had a Nebraska nasty one year for large hail. Sort of, making it a little bit entertaining, but not too, hopefully not too much over the top. Cold as F in Chicago,
You almost got us knocked off television there, Greg.
Something about that Nebraska nasty. That needs to be a show title. That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah. Sure, the people in Nebraska appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we could share this one if you wanted to. I'm not sure. Let's see. Do I want to call? How do we do that? You want to look at these on the screen?
We'd love it. It should have a button at the bottom in the center that allows you to do it.
Oh, there it is. Let's see.
Might be different on a Linux box. I don't know.
I'm going to share this desktop. All right, let's share desktop 1. Tell me if we've got it up.
Bingo,
Right.
bingo, looking good.
All right, so we're starting in 2010 here. I'm obviously not going to cover all of these events. This one was fun though, because this was the year of the double rainbow. Remember this video on YouTube? If you don't, you should look it up. This guy's a riot. Double rainbow. Oh my God! Over the Tahoe Valley.
What does it mean?
Yes. What does it mean? So we had fun with that one in 2010. There's heat in there. There's tropics. There's flooding. There the double dumps in Delmarva. There you go.
Wow.
Those days are long gone. 10 years ago. So you're on to 2011. Not a lot of fun in 2011, a heck of a lot of weather. January northeasters. I think there's tornado 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tornado events. So 50% of this talk is tornadoes in 2011. And it's hard to see, but again, number 10 was going to be initially was to be continued. But I filled it in with October snowfall records across the Great Lakes region. I believe that was in 2011, late 2011. 2012, this slide has, there's the tornadoes go missing there, number 5 with the milk carton in the middle. It's kind of hard to see, but 29 June, the derecho in the mid-Atlantic was pretty remarkable.
Oh, right.
The other one that didn't, I guess, let's see, heat and drought are in there. Yeah, record warm winter and tornadoes. March of 2012 was a pretty amazing month as far as temperature anomalies go. It also featured the Ohio Valley tornado outbreak early in the month. And then it was just that, that dome of heat that persisted right on into summer months and actually provided some of the fuel for the derecho that got going from one small storm in Fort Wayne, Indiana, started this massive derecho that went, trailing right across the Ohio Valley, across the Appalachians and into the mid-Atlantic that evening. Widespread devastation and power outages with that. And then of course, who can forget Sandy coming late in 2012, October 2012. So that was a busy year. 2013, let's see, we've got, again, I think I made a pattern of putting a nor'easter in every one of these, at least one nor'easter in every meteorological memories, because that's how I got interested in meteorology, was growing up in New England and watching nor'easters. And there's a weird picture here. It looks like Nemo. It's Nemo, and it says, "I'm coming." I think that's a reference to whatever one of those storms was named.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
For what that's worth.
Yeah.
There goes Nemo. The Colorado floods are interesting. In September 2013, amazing amounts of rainfall in the foothills of Colorado, causing devastating flash flooding with that. And then in the lower right-hand side of all of these images, you'll see a map with a bunch of stars. That's just where the NWA meetings were. Wherever the NWA meeting was that year, I put a star. It's kind of like the Stephen Colbert thing, where he threw a star up on the board. So,
well, Greg, in 2013, who can forget the El Reno? And I love the WTEF, because that is they're still arguing that one, aren't they?
There's a story behind that, but
wow.
So, yeah, good catch there.
Yeah.
2014, California's drought nightmare. I went back and looked at the records for temperature and drought. I think at one point in 2014, 40% of the contiguous United States was in some category of drought. So compare that to what we saw happen this last year. It was a comfortable summer across much of the Midwest and Northeast. And that's a rarity, and that was kind of nice. The Western wildfire facts, and then more snow and cold. I think pretty remarkable Great Lakes snowstorm late in 2014, and a record low tornado count for the year.
By the way, my eye starts to twitch over number 1. Snowmageddon is what it was referred to.
Oh yes, yes.
My back still remembers that night sleeping on a conference room table.
Oh, brutal.
Yeah.
Atlanta and Birmingham, you just would not believe how bad it was. Oh, goodness.
On to 2015. So Boston snowfall records buried. The Fairdale, Illinois EF4 tornado, more western heat and drought, more fire. This was an interesting year. I did some work on seasonal severe weather forecasting in 2015. It wasn't a very active, cool season. You can see that nearly watchless winter. And then Joaquin, never making landfall in the United States, but contributing to an extreme rainfall event across parts of South Carolina and North Carolina. And then some pretty unusual high plains tornadoes occurring in the month of November. So a whole array of memories from 2015.
Wasn't that the loss of the El Faro ship?
Yes.
Was that Joaquin?
Joaquin, yep.
Yeah.
This one's a little fuzzy, 2016. Okay, so this is my first year transitioning between SPC and WPC. So it was a mad dash to try to put this event together while also spinning up in a new job. Went back to the end of 2015 and the beginning of 2016 for the wet and wild close of the year before. Some really amazing rainfall totals and flooding with southern, very, very active southern stream and into the southern plains and Midwest. And then I just missed by 2 months the record nor'easter for the DC and Megapolis, DC to New York, Boston corridor. Event number 2 there. Anthem of the Seas was an interesting event. They seem to like to go into the surf with some of these boats. I don't think that's a real picture there. It's kind of hard to see anyway. Did a review of ENSO and severe tornado watch boxes, which is kind of interesting. Sold my house in Norman, Oklahoma after a hailstorm. So that's a hail sale. And then there were 2 events that came to WPC, and they start hitting fast and furious. The West Virginia flash flood in June 2016, and then in August, the Louisiana flooding in the Baton Rouge area. Hurricane Matthew followed that, and then Southeast drought and fire for the end of the year. Some pretty devastating wildfires occurring in areas that we don't usually hear them occurring too often. So there's 2016. 2017, where were we? We were in California for the NWA meeting. And this one also runs the gamut from winter storms, March wildfires, and especially in Texas for memory number 3. The first nor'easter here in the mid-Atlantic, but it really didn't do much in the DC area. Most of it was to the north. Ozarks, Missouri, spring flooding was pretty dramatic. And then, I think I did this. I remember doing this one on WeatherBrains at the end of 2017 and deciding that number 10 had to be the California wildfires. Of course, Harvey is also part of 2017's memories. And 2018, we did another bomb cyclone. There's the obligatory nor'easter for number 1. The Montecito debris flow event for number 2. Not a lot of tornadoes for number 3. Memory 4. I think memory 4 was the event we talked about earlier across the upper Midwest, the record snowfall across parts of Green Bay. Ellicott City. Ellicott City number 1. Occurring at the end of May of 2018. And then running out of time, the abridged version of Memory 6, 7, and 8. I think there was a widespread kind of derecho wind, severe weather outbreak from the Midwest to the Southeast. Decided to throw the volcano in Hawaii in there, really because as far as the meteorological factors that introduced the word VOG to the vocabulary. Yep. And some dangerous fumes coming from the volcano. Widespread precipitation records broken across much of the eastern U.S. in 2018. And of course, just told you a few moments ago about memory number 10 coming in after the original presentation as Hurricane Michael. So that brings us to the review we just gave through Hurricane Dorian. And so I picked out a few events here for the decade. And again, these are my memories. I did go back and review some of the climate information that is provided, excellent climate information. The NCEI does a review of the extremes every year. And most of these events that I'm going to show you now are on the list there during the year. So here is the list for the decade. So I started in 2010 with the historic Nashville flooding, over 15 inches of rain in early May.
Right.
Runner-up would be the record snowfall in the East. 2011, of course, you know, the outbreaks across much of the central and southern United States from mid to late April. And then the runner-up for 2011 would be Irene in late August. What's really fascinating about April 2011, especially following it, the April 27th event in the Mid-South and Deep South, it shut down. Tornado events basically didn't exist for another month. It's almost like the atmosphere had this extreme instability and shear associated with it for almost the entire month of April. But after the 27th, it was done for a while. Of course, not long. I mean, we had other devastating events in 2011 that were pretty remarkable and actually somewhat mimicked late 50s events. The Springfield, Massachusetts tornado occurring in June of 2011 is interesting because it also occurred. There were similarities to active tornado periods in the 50s.
Greg, is there any evidence based on what you said about the April, the lull afterwards? Is there any evidence to back that up? You have this big explosive thing and then it's got to rest.
It is no, I've not seen any published review on that. Harold Brooks and I did a paper for Science that talked about the incredible variability and apparent increasing variability in tornado events by year. But, I mean, common sense would suggest at some point, the way the atmosphere works, the pattern shifts and all of a sudden you're in a different regime that doesn't support severe. And that's certainly what happened going into May of 2011. But it also warrants probably a closer inspection. Is this something that happens in other active patterns as well? And how do we quantify it? So that's a good question.
Well, there's certainly some truth to the increased variability of the jet stream. That's playing its hand both in the tropical season and in the winter season.
Yes. And I'm in the process of gathering up a whole bunch of data from upper air soundings over the last 60 years. My computer's actually been running almost nonstop through the holidays trying to get an update to all the sounding data for the contiguous United States back to 1960. This is similar. Much of this data actually was established by SPC on their sounding climatology page. I've been working with Patrick and Jarrett Rogers on updating some of that data. But in the process, I've decided I want to keep that data up to date all the way through the end of this year for a nice clean data set for the past 60 years for approximately 50 upper air stations across the country. So I've just started to look at some of this information from a perspective of change. What's really interesting, and no question, you can see the warming occurring in the lower levels. You can see higher heights. Kind of counterintuitive to that, at least preliminary, it looks like there seems to be a slight increase in mid-level winds. So that's a bit paradoxical, considering that we would expect to be seeing maybe perhaps a weakening of the mid-level jet stream in a warmer climate. That's not what I've seen so far, but it's all very preliminary so far. So I'll let you know how things.
Yeah, that's intriguing.
So Sandy was pretty dramatic in 2012. The Mid-Atlantic derecho we mentioned, record warmth we mentioned earlier. So those are three events from 2012. We talked about El Reno. El Reno, just an incredible day and a devastating day as well. And in hindsight, a really interesting storm scale evolution to that particular event. The wind fields adjusting essentially as the thunderstorm developed, creating an environment very conducive to violent tornado. But that environment was, and this happens quite often, but it was really dramatic in this case, that you don't necessarily see the conditions of instability and shear prior to the violent tornado. And in this case, what happened is the actual thunderstorm modified its local environment to support a violent tornado. So really fascinating from a extreme meteorological perspective. So 2014 California heat and drought. NCEI site has a remarkable amount of information on that. It's very dramatic, and it is something that is interesting to review. And then we see the wettest year on record for Texas and Oklahoma in 2015, with a runner-up being Joaquin, more flooding in the southeast. 2016, crippling nor'easter, West Virginia flooding, and Louisiana flooding. 2017, Harvey's historic rains. 2017, I put these two right next to each other, the most destructive wildfires in California history there. So Harvey's rains and fire. It seems like rain and fire. These are the extremes. 2018, I lived through this one, wettest year on record. Runner-up was Hurricane Florence, more rain. And then 2019, even more rain and flooding. So that's my list. Again, your mileage may vary, but these were all quite memorable events, and I'm certainly glad I was, sort of journaling these things in annual reviews, or I don't think I would have been able to come up with this list as quickly as I was able to today. So.
I would add on the 2015, that was my first full year here, first spring here in Wichita Falls, but that marked the end of a punishing 5-year drought. But the really interesting numbers to me were in 6 weeks, in May and the first 2 weeks of June, our two main reservoirs, including Lake Arrowhead, which is a very large lake, were down below 20%, and we filled them in 6 weeks.
And again, it sort of goes to that theme that we're talking about with tornadoes and variability. These dramatic swings from one extreme to another are certainly memorable, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And extremely interesting.
There was a tropical system named Bill in the middle of that, wasn't there, somewhere in 2015? Kevin, wasn't that the one that caused all the problems?
I have the worst memory on these things. I'm sorry, I just don't remember off the top of my head.
I think it blocked I-35 for a time. I was in Ardmore. Didn't get to Norman for the.
Oh yeah, that does sound vaguely. Most things named Bill, I kind of tend to block out shortly after they happen. I'm sorry.
Ooh.
That was too easy. I'm sorry.
So Greg, in any other year, Joplin might have been its own.
It occurred to me after this list, Joplin should probably be in. Not should. Joplin needs to be added to the list here. Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing here. I think I can do that.
A byproduct of some of this recent rain in the last couple of years are the record lake levels at the Great Lakes. So there's a lot of property at risk now around the Great Lakes.
Yes. In fact, if I were to pick two dramatic sort of quasi, they're more climate than they are weather, but I mean, again, we talked about Alaska. Alaska's one story, and I think sea level rise, especially in recent years, is another. We've had so many days, even here in the DC area, where we're talking, coastal flood warnings in effect, or advisories in effect for coastal flooding, just from high tide, and we've seen that up and down the East Coast. It is interesting to I'm not sure to what extent other parts of the world, in the West Coast or overseas, are experiencing similar rises in sea level, but. East Coast sea level rise and Alaska temperature rise would be the two, top decadal, quasi-meteorological, more climatological events of the decade in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So do you remember 2 seasons that had 2 bomb cyclones of that magnitude as we did this year? Correct?
Yeah, I can't, not off the top of my head, but what we saw this past, was it a month or 2 ago, was the bomb cyclone off the West Coast, right? And actually maybe a new state record low pressure for California. So that was certainly an interesting event. There's just so many, right?
How long will it be before we know whether that Illinois state record is official?
It may be that already. I'd have to check with the state climatologist and see what they've determined there. And there's a committee, right? I mean, there's an extremes committee that will review these things as far as measurements go and citing and period of record. There's a lot of work that goes into determining whether something does meet that criteria, being quote unquote all time on record.
And these are all, either devastating or very meteorologically significant. Yeah. Are there some fun and zany and trivial things that you run across sometimes that you'd like to include in the honorable mentions or something, Greg?
Well, it's funny. You often will hear some requests for, well, what about the earthquake, or what about the tsunami, or what about
exactly.
One of my earlier talks from the prior decade did highlight the sunspot cycle, and then I'm like, no, I can't do that. Well, it's space weather, so maybe that's okay. Again, these are my rules. I guess I can. Yeah.
You are the commissioner. You make up your own rules.
That's right.
So there are these other, the volcano was one of those that was a tough call, but certainly had an impact and wasn't all meteorological, right? I'll keep zany in mind.
So anything else anybody else wants to nominate for this year or any of those other years of the decade?
I think Greg's got them all covered. Yeah. I was gonna ask Greg, what's going on at WPC, man? Come on, give us the inside scoop. Tell us what's happening.
Oh, well, I will tell you, we've got, there's never a dull moment. There's always something. I mean, whether it's flooding or whether it's, extreme low pressure like we saw in California, whether it's a heavy snow event or icing like we're seeing in the Northeast now. The folks there are incredibly dedicated, great meteorologists. There really isn't, in my opinion, a better operational setting for meteorology than WPC. Of course, we're right next to the Ocean Prediction Center too. And they've got a tremendous responsibility covering both the Pacific and the Atlantic basins. In fact, out of all the national centers, Ocean Prediction Center does cover more land area in terms of forecast products than any other center, and probably less data, right? Because they're out over the open ocean. Yep. And some of the advances that have been made in ocean prediction are pretty remarkable. We're also right next door to the satellite analysis branch too. So they're working on environmental hazard detection from satellite. So there's always a lot going on. In the most recent years, we've been trying to focus more on communicating the risk of hazardous weather, ideally in the form of probabilities, but that is a challenge, as we all know. How do we combine probabilistic information in a way that people understand and can digest relatively easily without confusion? That continues to be a real challenge. It is pretty amazing when you're even just looking back at these 10 years is, how far we've come in such a short period of time with respect to accurate prediction. But, what is also kind of frustrating is you don't want to rest on your laurels because you're only one storm away from a incredibly terrible bust. So you get reminded of that quite often. But making progress in the prediction of extreme rainfall, I think, is the focus for WPC. And I think we've made some pretty good progress there with the excessive rainfall outlook. James, I still use your analogy once in a while when speaking to people about extreme rainfall and flooding, is that, there's this disconnect with respect to the danger from rain, because people can go out in the rain and they don't face any danger, right? But they don't go out in a tornado. And so we need to figure out, how to communicate that risk for extreme rainfall and flash flooding, and, get people to make the right decisions with respect to where they go and what they're doing in the presence of really heavy rainfall events, similar to the way that I hate to say it, but, fear and think about what they're going to do with respect to a tornado outbreak. If we could make progress there, I think we could save a lot of lives from flash flooding.
I think we're starting to see more and more people using your products, Greg, the excessive rain outlook for day 1, day 2, and day 3. Those are wonderful products. And they are very helpful. And I see more and more people using those, getting them to the masses. So that's great.
We're working on that and trying to convey what we're trying to say in those products. And really, behind, just like SPC, behind every one of those products, there is an incredibly dedicated and talented meteorologist and numerous meteorologists working together to convey that risk as accurately as possible. So really proud to be working with that crew at WPC.
Well, Greg, Troy here. It's been a few years since we've done this, but it's kind of a split off from SPC. What about the heavy rainfall of the MCDs that we started doing through WPC? And I assume that the program, I love it. I love what y'all do. I'm not saying anything bad against SPC. I think the decision to do that was a good one. But I assume that the MCD program is going well for the mesoscale discussions for heavy rainfall as well.
It is, and those are really remarkable because they kind of fill this niche sometimes between the watch and the warning. And again, the level of dedication and attention to detail on some of those discussions is really very remarkable. And I just give a lot of credit to the forecast staff that are working there, keeping an eye on that. We call that desk the Met Watch desk, and essentially, when there's a chance for heavy precip, they're on it and they're watching it closely, and they're bringing the latest science to bear on how the event might evolve. And so there's a lot of dedication to put those mesoscale precip discussions out there. They're not really they're publicly available, but they're not for Joe public. They're more technical in nature, because that's the kind of information I think that we can feed to other meteorologists, to broadcasters, and then the broadcasters can go and make that message heard loud and clear to the general public. So
is there anything in the pipeline for the general public on that? Because you make that interesting point. You're putting out a more technical product, but what about for the general public?
Well, I think for the general public, if you go to the excessive rainfall outlook, so again, the mesoscale precip discussion is kind of this. Hopefully there's maybe already a watch out, right? So the public is generally aware that there's some threat for flooding in a watch, but maybe they're not in a warning yet, or maybe there's an evolution with respect to these thunderstorms that would create a very heavy rainfall situation over a relatively small area. That detailed discussion can feed into the messaging that occurs on the local scale. WPC can't reach out to the local level, right? Like a WFO or a broadcast meteorologist can. So this fills this little gap where the expert meteorologist at the local level, it either confirms or reinforces the information they're already looking at to provide, a heads up in a very short range time scale to the general public. So I'm not sure how you I think that's how you make that leap. The technical information goes out there, it's read by other meteorologists who then have, as part of their responsibility, communicating to the local populace. So that's where that niche is filled. The excessive rainfall outlook actually is probably a more public-facing product, and we have tried to describe those risk areas in plain language and in colors and numbers.
I feel like I see this increased awareness. You made the comment a moment ago about, the space in between a watch and a warning. And I feel like there's increased awareness in several areas in that these in between products. Do you have any comment with regard to both WPC, but also what you see in the overall enterprise in that area?
So it is interesting that, go back far enough, the information content with regard to hazardous weather came in these rather disparate chunks maybe 2 decades ago. Model runs and then assimilation of that information and a forecast discussion, maybe a watch, and then you get a warning, or maybe an outlook watch warning. I honestly, I think with the advent of 6-minute radar updates, we've gotten to a point where especially sophisticated users want a continuous stream of information regarding risk or regarding threat, regarding evolution and technical features of the atmosphere, a continuous stream. That is a really tall order to fill, right? And I think we've been attempting to do that ever since the advent of rapidly updating radar information. Now we have high-res rapid refresh data every 15 minutes in forecast space. That is not going to stop, and we're constantly working to try to provide that continuous stream of information while at the same time remaining relatively accurate, right? Because you don't want to get too far ahead of this where you're providing an enormous amount of information that isn't doing anyone any good. So there's this really challenging balance that we have to reach here between constantly updating information from hundreds of sources, right? I mean, ensemble information, radar information, satellite information. The bandwidth has increased dramatically. There's a need for real-time information and rapid updates. How do you manage that? And I think we're seeing that with respect to the evolution of some of these products, like the mesoscale discussion, the outlooks, and now going in flood warnings, going to impact-based flood warnings.
What can you tell us about hazard simplification in there? Eli Jacks has been on here.
It doesn't sound simple to me.
Yeah. Well, we know they've been working for a number of years and have identified some things in the flooding area that they feel like they can trim. My understanding is that's still the actual execution of that is at least a year or a year and a half off, if not closer to 2 years. Do you know?
Yeah, I think there's a general agreement that we're going to remove the word flash from watches, not from warnings. Basically, a flood watch is a flood watch is a flood watch. That is simplification, and I do think as well it's not a degradation of information either. But the word flash will still be used for the warning mode when there's another phrase that's used as rapid onset flooding. But yeah, the challenge with flooding is that it takes a lot of forms, right? I mean, tornadoes take a lot of forms too, but not quite to the extent that you see flooding. I mean, flash flooding or rapid onset flooding occurring over a very short period of time, impacting urban areas and roadways. But then there's also the river flooding, which we saw last for days across parts of the middle part of the country. So there's this spectrum of flooding that does not lend itself well to simplification. But I think the attempts there are to try to remove the word flash from the watches, at least to start. Eli Jacks has been instrumental in this. He's been working. I've never seen anybody work so hard on trying to, evolve the service in a way that could better serve the public. But in the end, it's really difficult to test these concepts. You kind of have to make some decisions, move forward, and see the results. With respect to the severe weather outbreaks, I think we have gotten better. I think the messaging is good. There's still disparities with respect to colors and numbers and words, and we still hear the issues with the slight risks. But overall, I think, there's just a genuine interest among the public for weather information. And I think people do educate themselves. And I think we probably don't give folks enough credit to, I don't think we're going to be able to simplify things to the point where everybody's happy. Weather's complicated. Weather's a challenge. It's not easy, but hopefully over time, there's enough assimilation of this complexity and understanding that the people make the right decisions in hazardous situations, which we seem to be having as many as we've ever had. So those are going to continue. And so I hope that the general trend is in a positive direction, and that folks, are able to understand what we're trying to convey with respect to the many services and products and forecasts that we provide. But it's not easy, right?
Let me loop back on something I mentioned a minute ago, is this direct communication with the public. Neil Jacobs, and this was over a year, close to 2 years ago, when he spoke in Norman, my interpretation of what he was saying was that the Weather Service was going to take a position, what I interpreted is, he didn't say this directly, but what I interpreted was the Weather Service would take a position of less direct communication with the public, greater communication or greater distribution of information and products with weather enterprise partners or participants, as opposed to direct communication with the public. Do you sense that? Do you have a comment on that?
So it's interesting. I was visiting relatives over the holidays, and for the second time this year, I got a complaint from a public individual about the weather radio not transmitting the correct forecast for their location. So NOAA Weather Radio is this backbone of communication that is supported and funded through the government and programmed by the National Weather Service. So that's not going away. That information is going to continue to flow and be publicly available. I think that is written actually in law with respect to the National Weather Service mission of protection of life and property. So it is the mission of the Weather Service to provide hazardous weather information to the public. And there are many forms that takes. It's interesting that, we've been living in the internet age, and we've really gone to the internet with respect to distribution, but there's also a whole host of products that are distributed outside of the internet that must continue to flow. Marine facts for mariners in the ocean, NOAA Weather Radio. These are conduits for the public to digest information that is completely free, and those are not going away, as far as I know. That those are established forms of communication that the Weather Service will continue to maintain.
But Greg, and I'm not going to spend much time on this, but we talked about weather radio, and we've had that discussion ad nauseum here. You've got to agree, weather radio, Greg, has gotten stale. There are technological advances that we could do to get directly to the public more, and whether that's the fault of the weather radio folks out there that commercially produce the radios, or whether it's the headquarters in Washington, I think we need to do some work on refreshing weather radio. We can make weather radio more than what it is today.
Oh, it should have been made more than it is today a long time ago, in my opinion. It should have been put on the FM band, for one thing. That would have gone a long way to increasing the exposure of the service. But it is interesting that just in this past year, I've had two completely unsolicited requests from individuals to explain why they were hearing what they were hearing on weather radio. And in both cases, there was an issue with the programming. So these are people, these are not meteorologists, general public. Well, one was a captain of a boat off of the coast of Maine, but the other was a good friend. And they both identified issues with NOAA Weather Radio that they had questions about. In following up on those questions, I was able to reveal some need needed change for those two programs. So there is a user base out there. It was surprising to me. But you can imagine, I mean, as far as a mariner goes, one of their only forms, he had both a cell phone and a weather radio. And in some cases, one worked. And in some cases, one always worked, but the other one didn't always work, depending on its location. So, you're an amateur radio operator, Troy, I know, and I am too. And there are some aspects of communication via radio frequency that are beneficial and hardened with respect to problems in the infrastructure. And so weather radio still maintains a role. I don't doubt that I don't disagree that it could use some modernization. Ideally, it should be in the FM band.
Okay, now I was going to ask about Neil Jacobs coming in as the administrator of NOAA. Your thoughts on that, Greg? But before you answer, we got to pause really quickly. I've got to roll Tony Rice in his astronomy report because I've got to go do the 10 o'clock weather. So I'm going to ask the question, hang up, and listen. So Bill, after Tony's report, you come back and you take over. So here comes Tony Rice as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
Looking back not just at 2019, but across the past 10 years, it was a decade of change in astronomy and spaceflight. The space shuttle program wound down and commercial spaceflight wound up. What initially looked like was going to be a new space race between a group of billionaires, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Paul Allen, and Richard Branson, turned into more of a boat race, with SpaceX taking the clear lead, especially in terms of innovation. Even after successfully landing the Falcon 9 rocket on land and sea, the company continued to push the boundaries by recovering payload fairings for reuse as well. As cool as this is to watch, it's not just for show. Since the company was founded, SpaceX has reduced the cost to low orbit by more than 80%. This was also a decade of planetary discovery, both here in our own solar system and beyond. During the last 10 years, robotic spacecraft from the United States, Japan, France, China, Russia, and India launched continued exploration of Venus, the Moon, Jupiter, Mars, asteroids, comets, Mercury, and our own sun. The Mars Curiosity rover returned evidence that Mars once was a very different place, where liquid water flowed over the right ingredients to support microbial life. The Parker Solar Probe revealed more complex, unstable, and active magnetic fields and the solar winds than were expected. This has added new challenges to space weather forecasting. Since 2010, an additional 16 moons were discovered orbiting Jupiter, bringing its known total to 79. Another 20 around Saturn, bringing it to 82, and an additional Neptunian moon, bringing it to 14. While en route to Pluto, the New Horizons spacecraft spotted 2 previously unseen moons, bringing its total to 5. Beyond our solar system, 90% of the confirmed exoplanets were discovered in the past 10 years. And that's thanks in large part to the Kepler spacecraft and its method of watching distant stars for dimming and wobble. These are telltale signs of an orbiting planet. 188 of the more than 4,100 confirmed exoplanets were discovered in 2019 alone. Astronomers have also continued to develop adaptive optics to cancel out atmospheric turbulence. And this has enabled them to produce images as good or even better in some cases than space-based telescopes. Since first imaging an exoplanet 230 light years away, an additional 23 exoplanets have been directly observed. And speaking of imaging, the Event Horizon Telescope project changed the way we view black holes this year by actually allowing us to view them. Using a technique that ties together telescopes on multiple continents, it creates a telescope that has an aperture nearly as big as the Earth itself. As awesome as all these things were, if I had to pick one event that stood out for me this decade, it would be the total solar eclipse of August 2017. You can look at images day in and day out, but actually seeing with your own eyes how bright the sun really is by experiencing it as it disappears, it's hard to top. Our next chance to experience a total solar eclipse in North America comes in April 2024. More on that and a look into the coming year next week. Elsewhere in the sky, the Quantitative meteor shower peaks this weekend. Best viewing will be Saturday morning between moonset around 2 a.m. and about 6 a.m. as the radiant point reaches its highest point in the horizon. While the showers produce upwards of 80 meteors per hour under best conditions in the past, expect no more than about 10 under dark skies this year. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
Well, no fancy sound effects to end Tony Rice's show here from our standpoint. So we've lost James for the weather. He's the headline in Alabama, as he always is. But I wonder, Troy, if we'll still be doing this show in 2024 when the next eclipse comes, you think?
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. That'll be show, 1973 or whatever?
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Dr. John, you think we'll still be doing this? Dr. John?
He's muted.
He's muted.
You're muted.
So Aubrey's not muted. Aubrey, you got an email for us, or can you talk?
I've got to go back into show. So
anything you want to add or pick of the week real quick?
I can do my pick of the week real quick. I found the link for the Best for Last Club in Fargo. Yeah. Visit all 50 states. Make Fargo your last one. You get a cool T-shirt. So I put that link in there for anyone who continues on their quest.
And Dr. John, I've determined that Bethany Beach is in Delaware, so I am only 7 states from finishing.
Ooh. Oh, wow. Very good, Bill. Very good.
All right. Have a great night, guys.
Bye.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
All right. Well, good. Anything to add to the weather roundup or any interesting weather going on around the country? We'll start with you, Dr. John. Anything up in your neck of the woods? Interesting.
We'll get back, as Greg knows, we'll get back towards seasonable numbers here the next couple of days, and then we'll warm right back up again as we head towards the end of the week. And another shot of rain as one storm after another tracks through our west. No winter yet.
I see some ice storm warnings up there in southern New York.
way up towards the Hudson River Valley, but not here.
So, any comments on that, Greg? Any of the winter weather going on?
Oh, I had a great week. I went up to northern New England. Went skiing day before Christmas Eve, and perfect conditions up at Bretton Woods in northern New Hampshire. Just beautiful up there. Like Aubrey, I was at a wedding over the weekend. A couple of weather weenies were married in near Worcester, Mass. And my wife and I actually were officiating the wedding, and that was a real honor. Gina Esco and Jimmy Correa were married on Saturday.
No kidding.
Wow.
Best of luck to them, and we really enjoyed the wedding and the celebration. So.
Is that how you get to ensure good weather for your wedding? Have the director of FWPC?
I think they were looking forward to bad weather, and they got good.
That's like Dick Nixon and Joel Myers, huh? And Trisha's wedding in the 1970s. So I don't know if that worked out or not. I'm not sure of my history there. Dr. John, do you recall? Was the weather good for Trisha Nixon's wedding?
I sure don't know, but I can tell you about my wedding. People are still complaining about how hot it was. It was a record. It was a record high in Charlottesville, Virginia, when we got married.
90, what was it? How hot?
96.
Oh, that's a hot day.
That was a hot day.
So I have a wedding coming up in Austin, Troy.
Come on down. That's right. Okay, I think you and I've talked about that. Yeah.
My oldest son will be married in Austin in July.
Oh,
it'll only be 137 that day. Yeah.
I'm going to feel that old.
Oh, that's funny. But you won't be officiating that one, I don't guess.
No, not that one.
Well, good. Well, Greg, anything else you want to add? Give us pick of the week. Tell folks how to get in touch with you.
So, like I said, I'm working on this sounding climatology. I've got AMS coming up. Going to talk about snow and tropical weather at AMS, which is exciting. Yeah. And then I'll be out in Steamboat the week after that, talking about probably snow and tropics.
Did you talk about future projects? I was away doing a show for a little while. If money, budget, people, no object, what would you want in 5 to 10 years for your office?
Virtual reality helmets.
Oh, I think Mark Zuckerberg's working on those for you.
And Oculus Rift gloves and 3D interaction with numerical model guidance.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I think we could get there.
Very cool.
You maybe fix weather radio along the way. Great.
Yeah. Be playing in your headphone.
That's awesome. Kevin, anything you want to add? Picks of the week, weather in your neck of the woods?
I did have a pick of the week it just came by somewhere and I lost it, but I said, it's Marshall Shepard posted elsewhere, said 20 experts predict the most significant weather and climate advances of the next decade. But people that we know, including Kim Coco McLean, contributed to that article.
She's a pretty big deal. And so's that tie you're wearing, Kevin. I like that.
Oh, thanks. It's I knitted it myself.
Very good. Very classic. Dr. John, did we catch your pick of the week coming by?
No, you didn't. And in honor of Greg being on the show, I picked a link from WPC, which is a probabilistic look at 32-degree temperatures or cooler across the nation.
Oh.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
I forget who our guest is next week. It'll come to me in a minute probably, but we've had such a great year this year. Greg, thank you for always being the headliner here at the end.
I would not miss it. Thank you, Bill, for the invitation. Thanks everybody for being here. And it's been a pleasure.
Well, anything else we need to bring before this august group here, Kevin?
Well, I think James left me with a question.
Yeah.
And I have had some interactions with Neil. It seems like a very he certainly got the resume and the pedigree for the position that he's been nominated for, and look forward to working with him. Seems like a really decent guy.
Well, that's how.
And I probably didn't do him justice in my comment I didn't fully flesh it out when he was speaking in Norman. I think what he saw was. He was not saying let's not communicate with the public, but I think that they realized that the Weather Service and any single organization, especially one with a budget, can only do so many things. And so part of their goal was to put forth the things that they could do. And then in the enterprise in general, 1,000 blossoms would bloom as opposed to just a handful that they could pick. And I think that seems like a good goal.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing the results of that. There's a lot to go around. There's a lot of things we need to do.
Right. All right. Well, anything else, Greg, you want to add before we wrap this show up?
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Happy New Year.
Very good.
We're all down here still recovering from James's vacation last week. I counted. He does 936 radio cuts every single night. Or something like that. It seemed like at least 936 when I was having to do some of them, but it's always fun to do that. But I guess we'll put a wrap on this show and the year 2019. It's been another fun year with WeatherBrains. I can't believe we've been doing it as long as we have, but it's still just as fun as it was the first. I think it's more fun than it was when we started, and we're so glad that you're still part of us, Greg. But until next week, we'll be back with you next Monday night. I'm Bill Murray for the whole group here at WeatherBrains. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you later.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
So long.
Yes. The year ender. That means we're done. Thanks to Greg Carbon. Always great having Greg on the show. It's a tradition every year, right as the year wraps up, to look back on the meteorological memories of the year and decade in this case. So thanks, guys. Got to go back and finish the news in here, but you'll have a great week. We'll see y'all next Monday night. And Happy New Year, everybody. God bless.